Hello, welcome to the Hawley Local History Society presentation. Henry Pelham will be describing the contents of a box from his grandma's attic. For more information, please visit the Hawley Local History Society's website at www.hawleyhistory.org.uk.
Okay, folks, so that's it, and we'll hand over to Henry, and if he can see his notes, he'll give us his talk for this evening.
Right, give me a clap.
Welcome, Henry.
Get the clapping before we get the booze.
That comes later.
I'll be away.
Panto is December, not November.
Can we just make sure I can see what I'm talking about?
Is that going to be okay?
That's good, thank you.
Are you all right with that?
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me right over the corner. Yeah? I mean, I went to a talk last week at another history club, and we never heard the speaker at all. And I was sitting where Brian is, so if you can't hear me, he can't hear anyway. He can't hear anyway. But if you can't hear me, just shout. All right? Thank you, Brian. Right. Okay, so we're off. This evening I'm going to work from a script because otherwise we'll be here all night. I'll tell you that now. This evening I would like to talk about a box and its contents found in my maternal grandparents' loft. A time capsule and gold mine for any family historian. I should start firstly by explaining how we came by it. Prior to retiring in 2006, Jean took an avid interest in family history, and over the last 15 years or so has become quite an accomplished genealogist. And in fact, during the recent lockdowns, spent much time researching early Surrey police officers for the Surrey Constabulary History Archives, which have now been deposited in the Surrey Archives at Woking. Around 13 years ago, whilst visiting one of my cousins, who, knowing of Jean's hobby, presented her with a cardboard box. I will add, a pretty tatty box, held together with string, as were some of the contents. Not quite as you would probably imagine, a nice lockable chest with all its contents neatly tied up with pink ribbon. That's for the movies, or Mills and Boon. The box had belonged to our grandparents and had been in their loft of their family home at Earlswood prior to its demolition in 1989. And like the box, some of its contents had seen better days, especially the photo and picture frames, which had fallen apart and were destined for the bin, as was the box. Although we were able to rescue the photos as well as much of the other contents. As we go through the talk, you will have to excuse the quality of some of the photographs. They are in the main over 100 years old, as was the equipment used to take them. Right. My grandmother died in 1945 and my grandfather just 1 year later. I was just 4. The family home shown in this slide was left to their children and it continued to be lived in by 2 unmarried siblings. The last one, my aunt, dying in 1988. Much of the bungalow had its contents and furnishings hadn't changed hardly at all from when their parents were alive. And as to the loft, and much like the box given to Jean, hadn't fully seen much light of day since the mid-1940s and was full of family memorabilia, photos, documents, odd bits and pieces, mainly kept by my grandmother, dating back to the turn of the century. Although others had dabbled more recently, by whom, or why, or for what reason, we shall never know, but replacing some of the original photos and documents with photocopies. There were, of course, many family and personal papers, such as wills, mortgage, insurance documents, etc., which should stay as they are, private, although there were some real eye-openers, as well as unexpected revelations to a younger, unknowing member of the family, raising more questions than answers, but have no real place in this talk. None of the original items which you're about to see I had ever seen before, or even knew about. And although this talk is about my family, I hope you will find an interesting insight into the lives of an ordinary family of the late 1800s to the mid-1900s. And as I progress, I think the talk will emphasise the need to ask as many questions of our forebears about their family life as we can, before it is too late, and never throwing away any of our ancestors' belongings, Stephen, before examining them closely for any information of their family life, especially photographs which can quickly remind us of past family events, however unimportant they may appear at the time. As they say, when they're gone, they're gone. So where to start? Firstly, for this talk, I've tried to put the various bits and pieces in some sort of order. I've also added some recent photos, which hopefully will make the talk a little easier to follow, and hopefully make more sense to you. I should also add that death and the memory of loved ones seem to be a very important part to all our forebears, including my family. And of course, in the early years of the 20th century, the First World War was to play a devastating part for most families. Mine was no different to any other, as you will see as I progress, and why any memorabilia, however small and would sometimes appear insignificant, becomes such an important link for a family historian, giving a jigsaw of family life, just waiting to be put together. So where shall I begin? I will begin with my great-grandmothers. Sarah Donaldson, my grandmother's mother. Many of you may remember I gave a talk at one of our meetings back in 2019, and have since written a book on Inspector William Donaldson, the first policeman to be killed in the line of duty. Sarah was his daughter-in-law. This is Sarah's family Bible, which you can see was presented to her in 1881 as a first prize for a regular attendance at the Mothers' Meeting held at St Matthew's Church in Red Hill. It's the rear page which is the most exciting for a family historian. It contains a handwritten list, mainly by Sarah, of the family names and birth dates, and also some death dates. The list was kept up to date by other members of the family over time, following Sarah's death in 1888. It also records my grandmother's death in 1945. The list also gave Jean a family member that she had missed, one of Sarah's daughters, Rosa Donaldson. Where is it? No, where you go? I'll get the staff, you know.
You don't pay them enough.
Rosa was born in August 1883 and died 6 months later in February 1884, and was completely unknown to us. The entry also gives a burial date. Another name that also appears is that of Alfred Charles Donaldson, a son of Sarah. Alfred served in the Queen's Royal West Regiment during the Boer War. Here we have a picture of Alfred Charles Donaldson in uniform and his cap badge. We have the cap badge. In 1899, Queen Victoria decided to send a gift of tin boxes of chocolates to her troops serving in South Africa. It was intended that every soldier and officer would receive a box with the inscription South Africa 1900, and in the Queen's handwriting, I wish you a happy new year. This is the box given to Alfred Charles Donaldson. Queen Victoria commissioned the three main chocolate manufacturers, Fry's, Cadbury's and Rowntree's, to undertake the order between them, which amounted to around 123,000 tins. As Quakers, all three refused payment, not wishing to be seen to profit from the war. but instead donating the chocolate. The manufacture of the tin boxes themselves was funded personally by Queen Victoria. The tins have rounded corners for ease of storage in a soldier's knapsack, and each contained half a pound of vanilla chocolate packed in wood shavings. No silver paper then, or plastic wrappers. Here we see the box open and its contents with some chocolate and wood shavings. Unfortunately, Alfred had been wounded during the Battle of Ladysmith and died from his wounds on February the 26th, 1900, just one day before the relief of Ladysmith. The box was part of his personal effects that were eventually returned to the family. Also as part of his personal belongings, which we believe was his last letter home, but never posted, and unfortunately this is a photocopy. The letter also included his last will and testament, written on the 4th of January 1900, just before being sent into, which would unfortunately be his last battle. Even today it's common practice, although not compulsory, for service personnel to write a will before embarking on what could be a fatal mission. The letter is to a lady named Ruth, and from the tone of the contents it would appear she was either a friend or possibly a future wife. Unfortunately, we will never know. He mentions that he had sent her £1 the previous week, as he thought she could do with a little pocket money, and will send her some more soon, as soon as he could, adding that a lot of poor fellows had died with lots of money on them that had been taken by somebody. The same fate also happened to presents sent from home, including his tobacco. So as a consequence writes that in his will he is leaving everything to her should he lose his life, but didn't want to dwell too much on that point. He also believed the worst of the war was over now, and that as a reservist would be amongst the first to be shipped home. Alfred is named on the regiment memorial in the Holy Trinity Church at Guildford, although at this time we are not sure which military cemetery Alfred is buried, or which memorial in South Africa he is named. Each regiment appeared to have their own battle site. We're also looking, but it's a bit long-winded, and of course the Commonwealth War Grave Commission wasn't formed until after the First World War. A family memorial was held at St Matthew's Church, Red Hill, following the news of his unfortunate death. And here we can see the actual memorial card that was attached to the floral tribute, placed in the church on the family's behalf by G. Cumber and Sons, undertakers of Red Hill. My other grandmother, my grandfather's mother, Mary Bundell. Mary was somebody I'd never heard of ever, and was a real mystery to me. Jean had found her basic name and details through her searches, but that was all. We know very little of Mary's life other than she was widowed. Her husband, Timothy Morley, had died at the age of 39, leaving her with 7 young children. Here we can see a photograph of Mary, now a widow, with three of her young children. The young boy at the back is my grandfather Joseph. Mary later remarried. As I mentioned earlier, death and memory of a loved one were very important to the family, which strangely led us to know more of Mary's death than her life. Mary died on the 4th of November 1929, aged 82. Her funeral took place 4 days later on the 8th, with a service held at the Red Hill Baptist Tabernacle, followed by a burial in Reigate Cemetery. As with most deaths at that time, a report of the funeral would normally appear in the local paper, as was Mary's. My grandmother had kept the report, but like all other newspaper cuttings found in the box, they were just that, cuttings, yellowing with age and very fragile, but had been neatly removed from the newspapers, with no dates or even which newspaper they were taken from. Luckily, one of my own interests is researching old newspapers. Again, like Jean, spent much of the lockdowns researching the newspapers for Surrey Constabulary reports, so I was easily able to find the originals. All from the Surrey Mirror, the social network of the day, complete with dates. There will be other examples later on. Mary's article gave us so much information, including who conducted the service, which hymns were sung, and more importantly for the family historian, a complete list of mourners, both family, friends, even who sent the floral tributes. The funeral was conducted by Stoneman and Sons, undertakers of Red Hill. A family preference, it would appear, on both sides of my family, which leads me to an envelope found in the box and marked Stoneman's. And I will show you one of the invoices, in particular Mary's. This is the original invoice for Mary's funeral, itemising all the details of the coffin, its interior and outer fittings, the grave number as well as the arrangements for conducting the funeral, with a total cost of £12.10. I'm not sure what inflation has just now, how that would compare today, but looking at other invoices in the envelope, by 1943/45 it was around £20, and by 1984 had risen to £400. Looking on the internet, it gives an average cost today as £4,000, and tomorrow, who knows? There was also a copy of an additional invoice for the Reigate Cemetery, again given the grave plot number, including its depth, 6 feet, and the time the burial took place. In this case, 3:45 p.m. Just quickly back to the Stoneman's invoice. One item on the invoice intrigued me. The hearse. It's listed as a Washington car and pair. What was a Washington car? Looked like I wondered. The pair would of course be the horses. A bit tongue-in-cheek, I decided to ring Stoneman's to find out. The phone was answered by a gentleman with a sombre voice, as you would expect. I explained that I would like to know what sort of hearse was being used for Mary's funeral, and maybe what it looked like. Did I have an invoice number, I was asked. I was a little surprised and a bit taken aback, given the funeral took place almost 100 years ago. Anyway, I duly gave the invoice number, and in a matter of minutes the answer came back with a description of the hearse and where I could see one that is used in actual funerals, but mainly used in films and television programmes. Here is a Stoneman's newspaper advert I found from 1920, which gave us a bit of a clue. And a modern photo of a hearse, Washington coach, pulled by a pair of black horses. As I mentioned, now used for the occasional funeral, but mainly in films like Oliver and TV programmes, and of course EastEnders. And more recently, Coronation Street, for the funeral of the Norris Cole character. My grandparents, Joseph and Harriet Louisa Morley. Here we see them both, and you'll see they're sitting under a rose arch, a traditional place for a Morley family photo, as you will see as we progress. As I said earlier, I have no memory of my grandparents at all, but with Jean's research and talks with my elderly cousins before they also died, we have been able to build up a picture of their lives, although it is my grandfather we know most of, a man of many talents, as we shall see. Joseph Morley, although a blacksmith and tinsmith by trade, was also a very practical man, able to turn his hand to anything, as we shall see. And at the turn of the 20th century, whilst living in a small terrace house in Hollis Row, Earlswood, and with 9 children to support, found a more lucrative way of earning a living. With all the large houses in Redhill and Reigate, he became a chimney sweep. His horse Tom, when not out working, would graze on Earlswood Common. This is Hollis Row today. Small terrace houses, 8 in all, and have, since the time my grandparents lived there, some 100 years ago, been altered and extended, but still with a white exterior. The view of the terrace from the other side, which backs to the railway, and can be seen when approaching Earlswood Station by train from the south, has changed very little, and would easily be recognised by my grandparents and their family. In 1912, Joseph took out a mortgage on a large plot of land in Masons Bridge Road in Earlswood, on which he would build a bungalow to accommodate his large family and provide a better base to expand his business. Here we see the original drawing plan. It's a bit fragile, but still intact. Not quite what you would expect to see on a modern drawing, but it was adequate for the time, and not having to comply with the strict building regulations as we have today. As you can see, there are only 4 rooms. 2 of them are bedrooms. The large loft area, which was accessed by an internal ladder, served as storage and bedroom area for the children, although by 1916 some of the older ones had left home, either marrying, going into domestic service, or, as we shall see later, with 2 of his sons joining the army. Also, if you look at the top of the drawing, up there, you will see that the building plot is given as Masons Bridge Road, Hawley. I will come back to that later. Okay. Here we can see the building in progress. Again, not quite as today. I'm sure modern day health and safety people would have a field day. The wooden scaffold poles, square lashed together with rope, the foreman wearing a bowler hat, workmen with flat caps. Of course, hard hats, safety shoes, high-vis jackets and reams of paperwork were still to be invented. Joseph Morley, hod carrier. He may well be the owner of the property, but not very high in the pecking order as a builder. Bungalow built, and by 1913, Morley Chimney Sweep became Morley and Son Chimney Sweeps, complete with a signboard. And of course, no business would be complete without a business card, even in 1913. The card was also large enough to be able to be used either for his bill of work done or as a receipt for monies paid. Joseph kept his business accounts simple. Joseph not only built a bungalow, but also a stable for his horse, and a cart shed. Here we see a couple of photos, both taken outside the stable. The one on the left shows one of my cousins carrying 2 buckets using a milkmaid's yoke. My grandfather and one of my uncles. And of course Tom, looking out there. The photo on the right shows Tom with Freddie the family cat hitching a ride. Okay, and here is Joseph in his workshop making new shoes for Tom. Joseph was always looking for a better way to feed his ever-growing family. The plot was large enough for a row of 8 pigsties and chicken runs, 2 large greenhouses that were heated by pipes from a large copper in which the pig swill collected from the large houses on his sweep rounds was cooked. The greenhouses not only supplied food for the family, but he also grew flowers. The flowers were not for the house, but to be sold on his rounds to the big houses. There was also a large building used for storing animal feed, also his ladders. and apart from the buildings there was a large garden in which he grew many vegetables, soft fruits including blackcurrants, raspberries, gooseberries and blackberries, and of course an orchard with apple, pear, plum and quince trees. For fresh water he dug a well, real self-sufficiency, long before it became fashionable. Here we have a photo of my mother before she married. I'm not too sure about the fashion statement. No. We're all silly teenagers at some time. She was operating the family well. The whole family were involved in its upkeep, all with their various jobs. Even the youngest of children had chores to do before making their way to school. The food being grown, together with the pigs and chickens, were in the first instance for the table. Any excess would be sold. The money would be used to clothe the family and any other household needs. I remember one of my older cousins who lived with our grandparents for a time. We just saw him with Tom on the previous slide, telling me that the family never had much, but they were always clean and tidy, well dressed and never ever went hungry. Joseph was an entrepreneur, and with a large family he was always looking for new opportunities to build up the business and make extra much needed money. To this end he seldom missed a trick or an opportunity. The family adopted the Baptist faith, attending and worshipping at the Red Hill Baptist Tabernacle in London Road on Sunday mornings and attending the local Tollgate Mission Hall in Monson Road, Earlswood on Sunday afternoons. Joseph, as well as religion, also saw business opportunities even here, and by the end of the weekly Sunday services had taken enough chimney sweeping and produce orders for the best part of the following week. I've mentioned the Red Hill Baptist Tabernacle in London Road a couple of times, and I'm not sure if anyone watching can remember it.
Yes.
The building was pulled down in the late 1950s, and I found this grainy picture on the internet. My parents were also married here in 1937. And here, the next one, and here is a photograph of the congregation at the Tollgate Mission Hall, all dressed in their Sunday best, including my grandparents, which are just there. Next. One of the byproducts of chimney sweeping was of course soot, and lots of it. What to do with it? The answer was to sell it to the gardeners, who would use it not only to enrich the soil, but mainly to break up the local heavy clay. How better than using the eBay of the day, the Surrey Mirror small ads. Adverts for soot appeared regularly in the Surrey Mirror. Of course, being a chimney sweep, he encountered many difficult chimneys with odd bends that he had trouble negotiating with his brush and rods. My mother once told me that whilst at the meal table, he would describe to the family the various chimneys he had encountered that day, and then illustrate them by bending either a fork or a spoon handle into the shape, hence resulting there were never any straight handles in the cutlery drawer. Now, I've just mentioned that he kept pigs for family consumption, but he also bred and reared and sold many to local butchers. Again, there were adverts in the Surrey Mirror from 1921 through to 1943. This advert appeared in the Surrey Mirror at Christmas time in 1933 from a Red Hill butcher, H. Burton and Sons, which gave the names of the various local meat suppliers, one of which was for pigs was J. Morley. There it is. Yeah. Again, where are we? I've lost it now. I've gone now. Yeah. All the adverts you've seen were originally faded cuttings from the box and have been reproduced by me from old editions of the Surrey Mirror. They were very much in the condition that you saw the little small ones earlier on. Okay. Here we can see a 50-yard swimming certificate awarded to Timothy Morley in 1912, where he was aged 12, issued by St John's School, Red Hill. We're not exactly sure where the test took place, but at that time there were public swimming facilities at Red Hill Public Baths in London Road and Earlswood Lakes in the Lower Lake. That's the 1950 photo. And of course the early part of the 20th century was dominated by the First World War, which affected nearly every family in one way or another. The Morley family were no different, with the two eldest sons serving in the army. Okay. Here we see Charles Morley in the uniform of the Royal Engineers, the Signals. Charles spent most of his war service in Mesopotamia, in and around Basra, serving much of his service as an army blacksmith. No doubt a busy man with all the army horses to keep shod, and no doubt a skill he had learnt from his father before the war, and one he would later earn his living at once back in civilian life. Charles was injured and was hospitalised in Baghdad for a short while, then returning to Basra for the remainder of the war. Mesopotamia, of course, became Iraq in 1920. And as is usual, there is little information on survivors. But again, we do have his hat badge. Okay, next one, Jeannie. Here we see the eldest son, Joseph, named after his father, but he was always called Jimmy to avoid confusion, both within the family and the business. Morley and Son. He was the son. This photo was taken at home under one of the rose arches, as were most family photos, and probably soon after he joined up in 1916, and most probably on his first leave. He is in uniform of the Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment. Okay. Another photo taken around the same time was of the family group. You can see Joseph in the middle there, and the little girl with white ribbons in her hair is my mother. Okay. Joseph was wounded soon after being sent to France in the early 1916. This photo was taken whilst he was at Red Cross Convalescent Hospital in Sittingbourne in Kent. Whilst at the convalescent hospital, Joseph wrote this now very fragile letter to his sister Jessie. The letter, which was unfortunately the last one we know of, he was posted back to France in August 1916 and killed by machine gun fire just 6 weeks later during the Battle of the Somme, whilst taking part in the attack on the German-held Schwaben Redoubt near Thiepval. His total army service was just 6 months. In the letter he writes of the bombing raids by Zeppelins flying over the Sheerness. It's a proper bit in for you, Brian, something that flies.
Thank you.
His total service was just 6 months. Oh yeah, see, Brian's put me off now.
Can I go now?
Yeah. He writes of the bombing raids by Zeppelins flying over Sheerness and of the ground shaking, of peeling potatoes and injured soldiers returning from France with colds and rheumatics after spending a lot of time in wet and flooded trenches. Almost all were suffering with spotted fever, a common fever in World War I, caused by the bites of body lice. It was also known as trench fever, not to be confused with trench foot. He mentioned that he hoped to go to the pictures on Saturday night, but they would not let any soldiers in since the outbreak. He also writes that he wishes to stay at the hospital for the duration of the war, but of course that was never going to happen. And you can also see he signs off, no doubt thinking of home, with a sketch of a pig. Hopefully the letter will eventually go either to the Regimental Museum or the Surrey History Archives at Woking as part of their worldwide project. Just returning quickly to the picture we saw of Joseph Morley just a few minutes ago. Okay. On the back of the photo, which also doubles as a postcard and sent to my grandparents' address, the unknown son sender has sadly written 7696, Joseph Timothy Morley, missing since September 1916. The first a family would know of a family member being killed during the war, of course, was the arrival of a telegram from the War Office. And following the end of World War I, a memorial death plaque would be sent to the next of kin. You will notice when we see them that there are no dates on the accompanying certificates. Any medals earned whilst serving his country, plus any medals served whilst earned in country. Although there were no campaign medals in the box, but we do have the original bronze plaque. This is the plaque and the accompanying certificate that was sent to my grandparents. The plaque is a 12 centimetre disc, 4 3/4 inches in old money, cast in bronze, and has a rectangular tablet where the deceased name was cast into the plaque. In this case, Joseph Timothy Morley. No rank was given, as it was intended to show equality in their sacrifice. Being bronze, the plaque became better known and is still referred to as the death penny. Other popular names were the dead man's penny or the widow's penny. Around 1.5 million were produced and issued, being manufactured mainly at the Woolwich Arsenal, using approximately 450 tonnes of bronze, although other sites were also used. It should be also mentioned there are also 1,500 female plaques produced. The only difference being to the male plaque, it reads, "He died for freedom and honour," and on the then modified with the addition of an S to read, "She died for freedom and honour." A more formal commemorative scroll was also sent to the next of kin, again not dated. Sadly, like many other soldiers killed during First World War, Joseph's remains were never found, but he is remembered on the Thiepval Memorial in France, not very far from where he fell. Jean and I did a First World War battlefields tour in 2014, and part of that was to visit the memorial at Thiepval. After a lot of searching, we were lucky and found Joseph's engraved inscription. There it is. And are most probably the only family members who have ever done so. A very moving time. Joseph is also remembered on the Reigate Borough World War I memorial plaque, situated on the main staircase in Reigate Town Hall. There we are. Just to return to the photo of the family home and to remind you how it looked in the 1960s. Okay. Here we can see the bungalow being demolished in 1989. As with the original building, little heed appears to have been taken for any health and safety issues, although by now there should have been. You can also see that the rose arch frames hung on till the last. There's one, another one over there. You may be wondering what happened to the plot when the bungalow was demolished. This photo was taken and shows where the bungalow once stood. And the remainder of the plot, which the pigsty, stable, cart shed and workshops once stood, has also had 2 more houses built on it. By comparing both photos you can get some idea just how large the original plot was. There are the houses in the front and this is further back. Okay. All that remains is part of the perimeter wall built by my grandfather in 1912. We also found this very faded picture of a young boy. We had no idea how it got into the box, because it must have been taken around 1945. How can we be so precise? Because it's me. Also, a faint image of a child's wheelbarrow, both made for me by my grandfather. The hair for the horse's mane and his tail came from Tom. Makes it a bit hearty, doesn't it? I mentioned earlier there were no medals in the box. That wasn't strictly true. We did find this one, blackened with age, but complete with its red, white, and blue ribbon. Whatever was it for? Okay. With a little gentle cleaning, its true purpose was revealed. A medal produced by Reigate in 1902 to celebrate the coronation of King Edward VII on the 26th of June of that year. But who were they presented to? The most likely answer, and is alluded to on the internet, is to the school children of the borough, unless anyone here knows different. Brian.
No, I don't think so.
This would normally be the end of my talk, but by...
Have you still got your wheelbarrow on?
No. Only a rusty old metal one.
Keep everything.
Father Christmas is coming and it. This would normally be the end of my talk, but by now I should like to take you back to 1913 for a few minutes, to an incident that happened close to my grandparents' newly built bungalow, and would have caused much excitement within the family and their neighbours. Of course, no talk with Brian being in the audience would be complete without something that flies as being part of it. And I am indebted to both him and Richard Cooper for some of the following slides. Okay. In 1913, airships were in full production in many countries, including Germany, with the Zeppelin airships, as we have already mentioned earlier in Joseph's letter home. The largest British one, HMS Delta, measured 190 feet long and 39 feet wide, and was propelled by two engines, jointly developing 210 brake horsepower, and could travel at the astounding speed of 44 miles an hour.
Do you want a description of that? Because I can actually get...
No.
If you want. It also had tilting propellers.
Yes, that was the feature that...
Giving not only its forward motion, but also rise and fall, and was being tested for the army at Farnborough. During the summer of 1913, both the Delta and her smaller sister Etta were often seen in the south of England, whilst conducting trials from their base at Farnborough, causing much interest from the public wherever they flew or landed with a problem, which according to the newspapers of the time was fairly often. On Tuesday, July the 1st, 1913, at 9:45 a.m, Delta left Farnborough for a long cruise to the southeast coast, passing over Reigate and Red Hill at about 11 o'clock in the morning at a height of 800 feet, and on reaching Shoeburyness on the Kent coast, turned for home, unfortunately having to descend at Faversham with engine trouble. This was soon put right, and Delta continued on her way. In the expectation of the return of the airship, hundreds of people congregated in the streets of Red Hill. Others were seen at windows, on roofs and any other vantage point. Considerable interest was further aroused with the arrival of members of the Royal Flying Corps in two Leyland motor tenders with supplies of hydrogen and spare parts. Around 9 o'clock the hum of the engines could just be heard, and Delta could be seen in the distance flying very low towards Red Hill. Then her sudden disappearance gave great cause for concern, and with the mobilisation of the motor tenders heading for the landing site, a recently cut hayfield at Hazelhurst Farm, close to Masons Bridge Road, Earlswood, Large numbers of people followed in cars, pony traps, motorcycles, cycles, and any other means of transport available. It would appear with the approaching darkness, coupled with the shortage of gas and damaged rudder that had rendered the descent necessary, and with the help of the farm owner, Mr. Jenkins, and his assistant, Delta was moored for the night. See how many people were there. Okay.
Excuse me. Oh no. All right.
Okay, go back
There you
one.
go back.
Again.
You can see pramulators down on the left-hand side there.
Are you in one of those, Brian?
No, I'll come later.
He's pushing it. Okay.
But the next picture you started to show, I think, is very interesting
Yeah. Go on.
for its technology.
Here we can see the gondola and the stowed propellers. They're actually stowed that way, and they can turn over and move about quite in many directions, which gave it its lift, its drive.
Very advanced. Very advanced.
Very advanced for its time.
Yes.
Right, next one. On Wednesday morning, the damaged parts were replaced. Unfortunately, one of the new parts buckled, causing further delay. And if you look carefully, you can see members of the Royal Flying Corps at the top of very long ladders. Doing the repair. Not a job for me. Finally, at 6:45, the airship rose and started her engines and continued on her way. So great was the interest locally that thousands of people journeyed to the field during the day. And at one time it was reported that over 2,000 were present, as well as contingents of children from various schools. This is Hazelhurst Farm entrance in Masons Bridge Road today. As you can see, they've got a more upmarket now, they've put a Z in it. Z-E-L rather than Z-L-E. Looks nice. Okay, and that's another view of the fields to the left of the entrance. We've got all sorts of buildings going on here now. I've mentioned the landing site at Hazelhurst Farm in Masons Bridge Road, Earlswood. And no doubt you will all be wondering whatever this talk is to do with Hawley. Well, not only did the Surrey Mirror correctly report the airship landing site as being in the parish of Hawley, and no doubt our team of current parish farm researchers will confirm,
Yes.
then the story you've just heard of my grandparents, their family and bungalow, which faced Hazelhurst farmhouse, all took place in the northern end of Hawley parish boundary, which should not be confused with the modern day postal districts and local codes that were only introduced in 1966 and finally completed in 1974. But what I am sure of is that almost all of you here tonight, unknowingly, have visited the farm and landing site at some time, maybe even recently. Today it's better known as East Surrey Hospital. Thank you for listening.
I'll make a remark.
Oh, shit, right, Brian, you've been weeks writing them down.
The tin box that Queen Victoria sent to the troops, I still have one from an uncle that was killed out there. But I'm one up on you because I've still got the chocolate in the basket. It's as
We had
white.
it.
No, it's as white as can be. And I look at it and close the tin up quick. So.
I think there's a little knob about the size of the sugar cube, wasn't there? That's all that's left in that one.
No, it's a complete one because he died right up against when the war was ending, 1802, 1800, yes.
1902.
Yeah, thank you very much, yes. So he died out there, so this bar of chocolate, when the tin came home, my father was the youngest of 10 children. He was, I think, the second eldest. He never even had met his brother. And so eventually, when my father died, I inherited this tin, which I thought was great. Sorry, I just thought...
That's right.
What
It's
Henry,
surprising when you look round how many there are about.
Yes, yes.
yeah, what Henry didn't tell you is that he's got the tin and the dead man's penny and the family Bible down the front here. So you probably wouldn't want any of them actually handled, but you're welcome to have a look at them.
Yeah.
And I can just add a couple of things about your ancestor who was killed at the Somme, Henry, because although you've been there once, I'm afraid Pam's been dragged round there about 101 times. Most recently we went over for the centenary in 2016. But firstly I can tell you that there weren't campaign medals in the First World War, so it's no good looking for them. Mostly soldiers like your guy will have been entitled to 2 medals.
Yes.
The British War Medal and the Victory Medal.
Yes.
And if he if he was in France in 1915, he'd have got the 1915 Star.
Yeah.
And they were the ones called Pipsqueak and Wilfrid, which almost all the soldiers got. The other thing is, I've walked across the ground of the Schwaben Redoubt, which, as you correctly said, is within a few hundred yards of the Fiat Val Memorial, and that's a terrifying, these guys attacked up a really gentle slope, and it was a network of trenches. Now, any of them got past it, goodness only knows.
Yeah. We stood at the Irish Memorial, and you could look out, and you could see it was just death trap, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder if you know that you said he spent a lot of his time shoeing horses. One of the largest horse depots was in Redhill, and he may well have been
Yes, we don't
joined
know.
up there.
We don't know. We don't know what. The one thing I will say, that when we look through the box, there are many photos that we can't identify. So if you're going to keep photos, I would really like, you should really write something on the back.
Yes.
Because although they're photos, that's all they are in the end.
The one thing I would add to that is to mark which side of the family they're on if you're passing on, because I lost 4 grandparents in 12 years. I've got photos, I don't even know which side of the family they're on, because we reunited mum's parents' stuff with dad's parents' stuff. I've no idea whether they're Marshalls or the other side of the family, so I would definitely agree with the right on the photos, even if you know which side of the family they came from, whose attic they came out of.
Very well done.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Much better doing it live. I done one over the Zoom, and you're not sure whether people are going to make a cup of tea or left the computer running while they're doing the washing or what. You haven't got a clue. It's not a good
That's
way.
very good, Henry. Anybody got any specific questions for Henry related
Yes,
to the
are
talk?
you putting this all down on paper with those pictures, please?
In a book,
In a book? Yes,
please.
please.
Can't write another book, Brian, can I?
No, you can, and you should do. Because you've done
already
all this
written it down.
research.
I would have thought it was worth putting a history note in Redhill Library, perhaps. Or Hawley Library.
Yes, please.
Hawley Library, but yeah.
I
Well,
come
Redhill
back.
Library, because that's all white bushes, isn't it? The farm is on white bushes.
The farm.
Farm on white
Oh,
bushes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Red Hill, so yeah, that should
Oh,
have a...
careful here, I'll dispute that.
Now it's Red Hill.
Now it's Red Hill.
It was, I've got a map. We only went over this map with, we sat down. I've got a 6-inch to the mile map of 1870, and we went through to actually prove that it was in Hawley. Now I know he started with this a bit later, but I'm certain it was in Hawley.
What, in the days that Henry was
Yes.
talking about? But it's not now, Brian, is it?
No, is anything in the right place these days? But we are historians, so we should actually put this information down.
Yeah, you should try and get it down there.
And as we're
It's a good
doing
On
story.
your farm list,
on
haven't
the
you?
farm list, yes.
Yeah, it's a good story.
Yes.
Anything else for Henry?
Sorry, I've sat down.
So before you go, try and have a look at what Henry's brought along, and we look forward to seeing you all at the Christmas quiz, which I think is only 3 weeks away, isn't it?
16th, is it?
16.
16th of December.